So General's Compass, he has given three themes to the International Salvation Army, and we have been following those themes this year. So people, mission, and then this series we've done is legacy. So this is the final part of General Buckingham's 3 points in his compass. And our final week as we go into, as we have Deuteronomy. This week is a little different than the other weeks because the other weeks we've been studying in Deuteronomy were great big national themes and national events. They were for all the Israelites, for everyone, all the people that Moses was talking about. But tonight we're talking about an individual, Miriam. And while other events that Moses was talking about in Deuteronomy concern the nation and national events, today we focus in on Miriam. This indicates the great significance of Miriam. Just like if I were to say Booth or Washington or Gandhi, that gives you people that you think about in your head, Miriam is a single person who elicits powerful memories. Unlike those men that I just mentioned, Miriam, of course, was a woman. And she was a woman who lived in a time when women seldom had leadership roles. The prophet Micah, however, lists her as a leader alongside or beside, says Micah, Moses and Aaron. So she's a leader of her people. Miriam was also called a prophet. When she led the people in worship, dancing and singing and playing her tambourine, she was leading people in worship, just like I get the privilege to do today. After parting the Red Sea, Miriam took up her tambourine and began to lead all the women together as they were praising the Lord. She is one of only 4 other women in the entire Bible who is listed as a prophet. Miriam's wit and leadership abilities show up early in her life. Although the Bible does not mention her name specifically in the story, she is the most logical choice for the sister who watched baby brother Moses float down the Nile River. And when Moses was discovered by Pharaoh's daughter, it was Miriam who was quick to suggest a Hebrew nursemaid for the baby, who was Moses' own mother. Thanks to Miriam, Moses was partially raised by his mother in a Hebrew household. Without these early life experiences with the Hebrews, it is doubtful that Moses would have had the skills or the knowledge necessary to lead his people. Yet we know from our Bible reading today that there is a dark ending to the story of Miriam. In Deuteronomy 24, Moses is recounting the various rules and regulations he wants his people to follow. It is a litany of what to eat, how to set up camp, who to marry, and then he comes to regulations concerning leprosy, communicable diseases of the skin. And at this point, Moses is reminded of his sister, Miriam. Unfortunately, he doesn't remember her as the wise prophet leader who as a young girl saved his life. He remembers Miriam later in her life, when she became a foolish troublemaker and God struck her with leprosy. In an instant, her skin became white and was decaying on her body. She was forced from the camp and into the lonely wilderness. After her return, she is never recorded as singing to the Lord again. Miriam, in fact, ends up dying in the wilderness, and she never sees the promised land. Moses says simply in Deuteronomy 24:9, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam along the way after you came out of Egypt. And while modern readers, we might be tempted to look at that verse and say, well, okay, that's a great lesson on leprosy. Thank you very much. I don't think that we ought to ignore Miriam's story. Chances are that every single one of us knows someone like Miriam. We know someone who is a saint of God, but allowed temptation, bitterness, jealousy, and divisiveness to overtake them. And as a result, their judgment was clouded, their joy was taken, and they either walked away from the church or became a form of a disease that spread to others in the church. I think about a retired officer my husband and I knew very well. And a few years ago, actually, she was a retired officer at the Corps that Major Paul and I went into training from. And so a few years ago, she passed away, and I called up the Corps that Major Paul and I went into training from, and I said, hey, I just wanted to let you know I sent a card to the Corps for the family of this retired officer. And I was so excited that I began to talk to the officer on the other end of the phone. And I began to talk about this retired officer and how important she was to Major Paul and I. In fact, she began to introduce Major Paul and I as her cadets. Something that sort of made both of us both humble and very proud all at the same time, right? She'd say, this is my cadets. And she'd have us come up and she'd introduce us. She went to the same university I went to. Of course, many, many years before I went to that university. And she used to, when I was a young college student, she would say, Amy Jo, I want you to give me your final schedule. And she said, I want that because I want to pray specifically for the tests you'll be taking when you're taking them. Just a wonderful saint of God. She, as I said, she went to the same alma mater I went to, the same college, and she was a huge Drake basketball fan, which my college is known for. Go Drake Bulldogs! And she would say to me, she'd say, Amy Jo, how are our Drake Bulldogs doing? And I'd be like, Major, you know they're not doing well, right? We'd have these conversations. And she was such a joy and an encouragement. And as I'm talking to this person on the other end of the phone, there is silence. In fact, for a moment, I thought the other person had hung up. And then all of a sudden, I hear this long sigh. And the person on the other end of the phone says, thank you. I was having trouble filling up a 10-minute eulogy of good things to say about this retired officer. Because the person I knew, Amy Jo, is not the person you knew. The person I knew always wanted to criticize, was always angry, was always wanting something to be different. And it broke my heart to think this officer who I knew as a young woman, who encouraged Major Paul and I so much, over the years had lost all of that joy. Over the years had lost all of that spirit and heart of encouragement, had let health concerns and discouragement get the best of her. When at the end of her life, the person who was responsible for standing up and preaching at her funeral couldn't think of 10 minutes of good things to say about her. And so as we think about what happens to these people, we can use Miriam as an example. And what happened to Miriam? The first thing we notice is that she was consumed by jealousy. The first verse of Numbers 12 says, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Miriam was the tambourine-playing prophetess. Along with her brothers, Moses and Aaron, she was a leader of her people. It is likely that she felt threatened by Moses' wife, who others probably regarded as a leader as well. There's a reason why you shall not covet is a part of the 10 Commandments. Jealousy can steal our joy and energy. Jealousy can destroy our sense of community. As soon as we begin to feel envy when others succeed, rather than joy, we head down a short road to misery, and we fail to thank God for his abundant blessings and provision because we are focusing on what we do not have rather than on what God has given us. Instead of being thankful that God had provided another female leader to the Israelites, Miriam wanted all the responsibility and hassle of leadership herself. She could not stand the thought that someone else might be able to play a tambourine or sing a song to Jesus. In a camp of over 1 million people, there was certainly a lot to do and many people to care for, but Miriam chose to look on another leader as a threat. Jealousy will cloud our judgment. It will make us work twice as hard, and our pride will quickly kill us unless we hold it in check. So the first thing that happened to Miriam is she got jealous. But it goes beyond there, because speaking of cloudy judgment, it is quite possible that Miriam was prejudicial. The Cushite wife of Moses was a foreigner. She was different from the Hebrew people. When we look at Numbers 12, the only description we have of Moses' wife and it's mentioned twice, is that she was a Cushite. This indicates that it was primary reason for the complaints of Aaron and Miriam. Prejudicial and judgmental attitudes will crush our spirit. Not only will they crush an individual's spirit, but such attitudes often spread like cancer. They either infect others or they repulse others. One of the top reasons young people give for not being part of organized religion is their perception that people who go to church are too prejudicial and judgmental. No one wants to be a part of a church who is more interested in passing judgment than on loving folks into God's kingdom. No one wants to come to a place where they feel like they don't belong. And that's what Miriam did to Moses' wife. Miriam made her feel like she didn't belong. We are called to go out into the world and to look on people as God looks at people, at their hearts. Moreover, we are called to be reconcilers in this world, to go into communities and to neighborhoods with the reconciling love of Jesus Christ. And sometimes this sounds like an impossible task, but one of the underlying themes of Deuteronomy is remembering that we must rely on God's power, on God's movement, on God's mission. We must open our minds to the possibilities of God in this world. Which brings me to the final issue with Miriam. You see, Miriam believed that her situation as a prophetess, at her station as a prophetess and sister of Moses, allowed her a position of power and prestige. She thought she was all that. You know, remember when Jesus says if you want to be a leader, you have to be a servant? Well, Miriam didn't think that way. She kept speaking, but stopped listening. She and Aaron ask in Numbers 12:2, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? Miriam and Moses believed that since God had spoken through them, they had the right to say whatever they pleased. For them, prophesying was no longer about what the Holy Spirit was saying. It was about what they wanted the Holy Spirit to say. They decided to use their position of power and privilege as a substitution for God's voice, direction, and leading. There is great danger in thinking that we know what God is saying without listening. And Miriam's manifest themselves as well-meaning folks who believe that God could not possibly surprise them any longer. The sea has already been parted, the 10 Commandments given, the manna has come down. God must be done. They are pleased with the idea of a God who has neatly defined borders and fits into small-minded ideologies. That reminds me of an old joke about a man who ordered an expensive suit for a banquet. And when the tailor had finished the alterations just in time, he changed into a suit and he ran out into the street where a downpour hit him. And all of a sudden, one of his sleeves on his jacket shrank up. So he ran back to the tailor and he said, "What do I do? I have this fancy banquet." And the tailor said, "Well, I don't have time to fix it right now. I just about finished it in time. Here, I have an idea. If you just kind of put your shoulder up into your jacket like that, no one will notice. You'll be just fine." And so the man, he left the tailor shop like this, and he had just gotten out into the street when another downpour happened. And all of a sudden, his pant leg shrunk. Well, he ran back into the tailor's office. He said, "Okay, you got to help me now." And the tailor said, "I told you, I don't have enough time to fix your suit. Here, I got an idea. If you just kind of hitch up your leg a little bit, you'll be just fine. There, you look great now." So the man walked back out and he walked along. And as he was walking along, two women said, "What is wrong with that man?" And the one woman looked at the other and said, "I don't know, but he's wearing a nice suit." Sometimes I wonder if we are trying to fit ourselves into a suit that does not fit. We must abandon the legacy of Miriam and her ill-fitted suit of jealousy, prejudice, and small-mindedness. In the words of Hebrews 12:1, we must throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. If our faith has any hope of sustaining us for the next generation, if we have any hope of leaving a legacy as General Buckingham wants us to do, then we must be clothed ourselves, not with some ill-fitting suit of things we think we ought to do or things we think ought to be, but with God's love. As it says in Colossians 3:14, clothe yourselves with love. We must wear holiness and righteousness that God has provided. So as we think about, as we end up this last sermon on the idea of legacy, I heard a statement the other day, and it says, inheritance is something that you receive from the past. Legacy is something you give to the next generation. As we think about legacy, what's the legacy that we want to give to the next generation? Miriam left a legacy that wasn't such a good one in the end. This wonderful woman of God who let jealousy, prejudice, and small-mindedness take away everything she had. It's so sad to me that this woman who picked up a tambourine and led the people in worship came back into the camp of the Israelites and is never recorded as singing again. As we think about that tonight, we want to leave a legacy of joy. We want to leave a legacy of faith. We want to leave a legacy that people say, hey, I remember that person. They were full of God.